In the U.S., President Donald Trump and his Republican allies suffered defeats as Democrats were poised to win elections in two states. Democrat Andy Beshear claimed an upset win in Kentucky over the Republican governor backed by President Trump. But the Republican candidate, Matt Bevin, said he will not concede defeat, citing unspecified irregularities. Democrats also seized full control of the legislature in Virginia for the first time in 20 years. Republicans held on to power in the Mississippi governor vote following a tight race in the traditional Republican stronghold. Political pundits say the results are a gauge of the political mood ahead of next year's presidential election. For more on this, we are joined by our correspondent Harry Horton from Washington, D.C. Horton, in a major blow to President Donald Trump, U.S. Democrats have made significant gains in state elections. Can we see the results as the preamble to the 2020 presidential elections?
Well, certainly I think Democrats waking up this morning will be in a far happier mood than their Republican rivals. These results are very good results for the Democrats, in particular in the state of Kentucky, where the victory in the governor's election there, that's a big boost to Democrats. However, I think we've got to talk about the fact that US President Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot in these local elections. It was local candidates. They were talking about local issues. So in the presidential election, which is more than a year away, we could be facing a very different picture. Of course, voters' attitudes may change in that time, and voters' attitudes towards President Donald Trump might be different to their attitudes towards their local Republican candidate. But look, worrying signs for Republicans here in the fact that they suffered big defeats in the state of Virginia, a big loss in the state of Kentucky. And in particular, when you look at these election results as a whole, Republicans really struggled to get support in suburban areas. And that's an area that Republicans have struggled with a lot in previous local elections. That's a big concern for them ahead of the 2020 presidential election. So the picture here this morning in Washington is that Democrats are feeling a little bit more confident about their chances in next year's 2020 election. And Republicans, whilst they're not panicking at the moment, they might be slightly concerned about the work that they've got to do over the next year to ensure that President Trump is re-elected.
So, Harry, when we talk about the impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump, has that anything to do with the changing of the voters' mindsets as the Democrats seized full control in the state of Virginia for the first time in 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell. I think it probably had some impact on voters in these local elections, although it's worth saying that in the state of Kentucky in particular, which is a big Republican state, voted overwhelmingly for President Trump in the last election. The Democratic candidate there, who was successful, of course, in that election, the Democratic candidate didn't talk much about impeachment, tried to differentiate himself from national Democrats, and took a very moderate stance when talking towards the electorate there. So look, there's some evidence to suggest that by steering away from impeachment, Democrats can be more successful in these more Republican-leaning states. But we have seen over the past few weeks steady support among the general public in the United States. If you look at the opinion polls, steady support for this impeachment inquiry that Democrats are carrying out. However, on the other side, we've also seen staunch support from Republican lawmakers towards President Trump. No evidence that any of those Republicans in Congress are about to break away from President Trump on this impeachment issue. And I think in large part that will be because those Republican lawmakers are confident that the voters, the Republican voters that elected them to office, also hold the same view. So there's still a long way to go, lots more damaging evidence emerging in this inquiry day by day. And of course, those things could shift in future.
There had already been a lot of hue and cry going on after the previous presidential elections of foreign meddling into those elections. Yesterday, U.S. security officials warned that foreign adversaries would attempt to interfere in the 2020 elections as well. So what sort of measures do you think are they taking to counter this sort of an issue?
Yeah, look, there's two issues here. The first one is interference in election infrastructure and trying to rig the vote, I suppose. So that's about election security, ensuring that all those ballot papers and election databases and machines, they can't be compromised in any way to affect the actual material vote. The other issue is about election interference in social media and in trying to change people's views towards the election through propaganda and other efforts. Now, on the first thing, on election security, I think the US security agencies are trying to work closely with local agencies and local groups to ensure that those election databases are as secure as they possibly can be, and they're working through different scenarios. So if they're hacked, if X happens or Y happens, here's how we're going to respond to ensure that the election is still safe and secure. On the question of those election interference efforts through propaganda and through social media campaigns, that's a lot harder to police. So what we've seen US security agencies say is that they're trying to educate the public about getting information from verified sources, how to ensure that those sources aren't foreign governments or foreign interference efforts, and trying to get people to report those interference efforts as and when they see it to their local officials. But that's a really hard thing to do, and I think it's fair to say that US security agencies haven't quite figured out exactly how they can do that properly just yet.
Harry Horton, our correspondent, updating us regarding the victories which have been taken by the Democrats against Republicans, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time.